Hi everyone, my name is Dimitri and welcome back to DimitriTube, The Love Square, Part 2. Let's talk about it. As always, if you're enjoying my videos, please go ahead and pound that like button, pound that subscribe button, and ring that notification bell. I'm a growing YouTuber and subscribes really help me out. Chelsea ends up saying yes to Jimmy, so now she has to break up with Trevor. When Chelsea goes to the pods to break up with Trevor, she was an emotional wreck and she could barely do it. She could barely even get the words out. She was so emotional. And I'm pretty sure Chelsea didn't even say it. Trevor had to piece it together for himself and then say, are you breaking up with me or something like that? Trevor questions her decision and asks why, and you should never do that. Do not ask a question if you don't want to know the answer. And whatever the answer is to this question, Trevor's not gonna like it. Chelsea responded with some bullshit response oh, it was just a feeling, I have a better feeling with him or something like that. But I don't think that's what it is. Jimmy truly just beat him to the punch. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about how Jessica and Trevor played their cards differently, but Jessica played her cards better. In Jessica and Jimmy's relationship, Jessica put pressure on the relationship. At first, she was patient and waiting for Jimmy to make a decision, but after a certain point, her patience ran thin and she put pressure on him to make a decision. And Trevor basically did the same thing. He was patient with Chelsea and said he would be patient for her to make her decision. And I, hands down, don't think he should have done that. He should have put pressure on the relationship just like Jessica did. And if anything, he should have proposed to her sooner. I truly only think Jessica said yes to Jimmy because he proposed first. If Trevor had proposed first, I think she would have said yes to him. And this is skipping ahead a bit, but during the pool party on a future episode, Trevor asks Chelsea specifically if she chose Jimmy because he proposed first, and Chelsea says no, but I don't believe that. I truly think Chelsea chose Jimmy because he proposed first. And one more thing I want to say about this breakup, Trevor said at one point, I tapped my bracelet 100 times today, and that broke my heart. And if you remember, Chelsea and Trevor exchanged bracelets and it lights up every time they're thinking about each other. That's what they were talking about. After that, we move on to the proposal, and this proposal was kind of crazy because Jimmy very much says that Chelsea lied about her looks and said she looked like Megan Fox. So the internet dragged this topic through the mud. I'm not gonna go over it again. I'm sure y'all saw plenty of feedback on it. But I do want to say, so when they were in the pods, they were asking about celebrity lookalikes, and Chelsea said she gets Megan Fox. And she reiterated multiple times in these pods, she does not think she looks like Megan Fox, but people say she's similar to her with the dark hair and light eyes. And she reiterated that in the pods. So if all Jimmy heard was Megan Fox and then he just ran with it, that's on him for not being a good listener. Also, the point of this show is to not choose someone based on looks. So if he only chose Chelsea because of that Megan Fox comment, that's on him and he deserves the ending he got. Next, during the proposal, Jimmy tells Chelsea that he almost went home that morning, and that is so crazy. Could you imagine someone proposing to you and then saying, oh, by the way, I almost bailed out on this proposal earlier this morning? That is wild. And I totally get it. Jimmy was still reeling over the Jessica situation, but I would have felt some type of way over that. Then we move on to the Dominican Republic, and Chelsea, Miss Insecurity, finally shows herself fully. And just a heads up, before we dive into this, I just want to say something overall about all of the contestants. In the pods, when the contestants are dating, they're basically on their best behavior. And actually, that may not be the best way to put it, but they're definitely on their toes and on top of their game, except for when they're drinking. There's been times when people have been a little too tipsy in the pods and they've slipped. But that is just natural when dating. When you first meet someone and you're trying to get to know someone, you want to present your best self. It's not fake. You just want to present your best self. And then over time, if you continue dating that person, they'll get to know more of the real you and you'll be more relaxed, which is totally normal. And definitely this season, when it comes to both Chelsea and Ken, we really got to see more of the real them outside of the pods when they got to the real world. And this has happened with multiple contestants throughout this show. And definitely for Chelsea, while they were in the pods, you didn't get to see much insecurity, but being in the pods is almost like being in a petri dish. It isn't until they got to the real world that you started to see see Chelsea's insecurities, which makes sense because now they're in person and in situations they're around other women for Chelsea to potentially be jealous of. Anyways, going back to Chelsea and Jimmy. Chelsea and Jimmy are in the Dominican Republic, and the first scene we see with them, Jimmy is already immediately talking about Jessica, and it becomes very clear he's still not over that breakup. And this is just a normal facet of this show that we've seen multiple times. If you're in a love triangle and you break up with someone and end up with someone else, that heartbreak doesn't just immediately go away. Like, you still need to heal from that, but given the timeline of the show, there's no time to heal. And Jimmy is still struggling with his breakup to Jessica, and he ends up telling Chelsea, "The day I told you I love you, I didn't have a decision made." And then later on, he says, "It's important for me to get this off my chest." And one of the things about Jimmy is he can often just be a little too honest. Yes, honesty is very important, but throughout the season, Jimmy had a few moments where he was just too honest and could have just kept some information to himself. And this was one of those moments. Why are you talking about your breakup with another bitch? You should be enjoying the Dominican Republic with your fiance. And not only that, Jimmy continues to tell her she's beautiful, but then also tells Chelsea looks don't matter. And telling any woman that would be pretty confusing, but telling Chelsea this is probably worse because she's so insecure. And just two more things about the Dominican Republic I want to mention. At one point, Chelsea asks, like, what was the first thing you noticed about me? And Jimmy responds, your big white teeth. And it was clear Jimmy was trying to keep it PG. So in case y'all didn't know, men are animals and we are very visual. But that comes to our detriment when it comes to these reality TV shows, because men on these reality dating shows are often dragged over some of the most natural things. And at this point, Jimmy has a camera pointed to his face, and he knows there's a camera pointed to his face. And this is a show regarding love. So Jimmy didn't want to be like, well, the first thing I noticed about you was that nice rack of titties or that nice. Like, he's trying to keep it PG and sensible. Because if he said what he really noticed, it's possible he would have gotten dragged online. And then when Jimmy did this, he was being super playful. He was like, oh, I noticed your big white teeth. Like, he was being playful, but Chelsea wasn't being as playful back. And Jimmy notices that Chelsea is just not as fun, not laughing as much, and she's not as silly outside of the pods. And like I said earlier in the video, when I mentioned Chelsea and Ken were much different outside the pods, I don't think Chelsea was being fake, but she was kind of like on her toes. But now that you're in person, it's a little different. Also, when you're in person, it's definitely an adjustment period. Like, we've seen this on this show multiple times. There is an adjustment period once you start actually hanging out in person. And then later on, Chelsea is insecure about being in a swimsuit, which I thought was silly because they clearly do a vacation on the show every season. If you didn't want to be in a swimsuit, you probably shouldn't have come on the show. And she also asks Jimmy what is his type, and this was like the dumbest question, because at this point it doesn't matter, Chelsea. Jimmy has chosen you, so whatever his type is, it doesn't matter. Also, like I said earlier in the video, don't ask a question if you don't want to know the answer. There's a chance that Jimmy's usual type is not you. So would it make you feel good to hear that his usual type isn't you? No, it's just gonna pick at your insecurities even more. So why would you ask that? And Jimmy even responds, it doesn't matter because you're my best friend, which was so sweet, but it didn't help Chelsea at all because she's insecure. Later on, the couples in the Dominican Republic meet, and Jimmy and Chelsea give us our first argument. Jimmy makes the comment that AD is stacked. Basically, she got body, yaddy, yaddy. And this comment to me was essentially harmless, but Chelsea somewhat encourages it. Like, she agrees with him and basically kind of made it okay for him to say this instead of shutting it down. If Chelsea had an issue with him commenting on this, she should have shut it down immediately in the moment, but Chelsea does not do that. So Chelsea gets sick, and then she ends up kikiing with Amy, and Amy gasses the situation a bit. And there's two things happening here. Chelsea and Jimmy are still learning one another, and also there's an adjustment from going from bachelor life to fiance life. Dang, I lost my train of thought. But going straight to fiance life, you shouldn't be commenting on other women's bodies. Yo, And at the end of the day, Chelsea just does not trust Jimmy talking to other women. And we're gonna get more proof of this throughout the show. So then later on, Chelsea and Jimmy go back to their suite and they have a huge fight. Chelsea is upset over the AD comments, and she also feels like Jimmy left her by herself. And just a heads up, to me, Jimmy is very much a life of the party type of guy. Jimmy is very much cool with everyone, and when you put him in a situation like this, he likes to hang out with other people and chat with other people. That's just his personality. And two things during this part really annoyed me. So Chelsea says Jimmy wasn't being loving enough and needed to be by her side more. And she says, you complimented AD and then I sat by myself. So it's very clear that Chelsea and Jimmy are still learning each other in the real world. But in this scenario, it was not clear what exactly Chelsea wanted from Jimmy that night. And for me, when it comes to having an argument, I'm looking for the point of like moving forward, what are we gonna change? Or moving forward, how are we gonna handle this situation? And Chelsea was not trying to get to that point in the conversation at all. And to me, Chelsea just wanted to share to Jimmy that she's upset, and she just wanted to have Jimmy take it. And one of the contestants from season 2 would also do this. So for me personally, I'm a problem solver. If there's a problem, I'm gonna be like, okay, how do we fix it? Don't come to me with a problem just because you wanna complain. Like that's like, if that's how you wanna operate, like we don't need to be getting married. Our personalities just don't match. And to me, that's what Chelsea was doing. She just wanted to be upset just to be upset. Moving on, Chelsea and Jimmy go back to the real world. And at one point, Chelsea meets up with a bunch of her friends. And Chelsea talks a bunch about Trevor. And I thought this was a red flag. Chelsea is engaged to Jimmy. And Jimmy is also right upstairs. But all you can talk about is Trevor. Like, that was a little disrespectful. And also at this point, Chelsea is catching on to the fact that Jimmy still has not recovered from his breakup with Jessica. And sidebar, one of Chelsea's friends straight up looks like Willow from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And just two more things I want to mention about this part. Jimmy admits that breaking up with Jessica is the reason they're in a relationship, which that is a mess. And Chelsea and Jimmy also talk about living situations, and Chelsea says she would move into the studio with Jimmy. And y'all, just a heads up, after the pandemic, you never want to move into a studio with someone. It's just not enough space. Y'all, I live in a 1-bedroom, and honestly, it's probably not that much bigger than a studio. And if I had to live with another person in here, I would probably KMS myself. Please only do that if you absolutely have to and you have no other choice. If you're in New York City and that is the only space you can afford is a studio and you have to live together because that's all you can afford, okay, fine. But please only do that if you have to. You think that studio has enough space now, but once you move in there, you will be like, wow, this is not enough space. After that, we find out that Jimmy saw a picture of Jessica, and we later find out it's because Jeremy showed him, and I'm pretty sure it was unprovoked, so Jeremy was just being messy. Chelsea and Jimmy get into another argument because Jimmy apparently didn't kiss her all day, even though Jimmy says he did. So basically it's a he said versus she said. And in this moment, it's not clear if Chelsea is just super needy or if Jimmy is lying. We can't really take a side, but overall it does come across as that like Jimmy is a words of affirmation type of person and Chelsea just wants a lot of physical touch from her partner. So they may just not be a match. Jimmy and Chelsea start arguing and Chelsea says, I'm not getting a glimpse of you as a husband. And Jimmy claps back and calls her clingy, and she freaks out and pulls out all the dramatics. And she eventually admits this was about Jimmy seeing Jessica's pic. So again, we know that Chelsea is insecure, but one thing she does that drove me absolutely insane is she'll never like address the argument. She'll kind of go around it and kind of nitpick fights about other things until we get to the meat of the argument. And here's an example. She was nitpicking about all these other things, but ultimately she was upset over him seeing Jessica's picture. And the same thing happened during the argument over AD. She played like nothing was wrong, and then she was nitpicking over these little things. And it wasn't until she got Jimmy one-on-one, she was like, oh, by the way, I was upset about this AD thing. And like, she could have said something earlier. And at one point in the argument, Jimmy says, I worked, I met your friends, we watched TV, we we had dinner. And now Chelsea's accusing him of not saying I love you enough. So to me, it's clear that Chelsea just likes to cause problems and she's just digging for something to argue about. And Chelsea and Jimmy end up making up after this argument. And Chelsea at one point says, I don't know where this stems from. And I'm like, I could tell you where this stems from. Girl, you just wanted to argue. Like, some women just like to argue. And I think Chelsea's just one of those women. And Chelsea also has this thing where she cannot be wrong, but at the same time, she uses feelings to be right. Like, she doesn't really argue with facts. And like, you can't really do that. Feelings are not facts. So if you're gonna start arguments, you need to have factual evidence. You can't just be like, I feel the entire time. But she literally uses feelings to justify arguments. After that, Chelsea meets with two of Jimmy's friends, and two of his friends are women. And after watching the show, it does make sense to me that Jimmy would have friends that are women. And I think in the reunion, he even admits that he can't talk to his guy friends regarding emotions. Like, he has to talk to women because his bro friends just can't navigate that or something like that. But to me, him having friends that are women tracks. Like, that makes sense for his personality. And one of the producers asks Chelsea how she feels about Jimmy having women friends, and she responds, it doesn't bother me because I have really close guy friends. And then Chelsea also says her previous exes cheated with friends that were girls. So this has red flags all over it. After that, we get this big blowout fight between Chelsea and Jimmy on episode 10. The night before, Jimmy goes out to have some drinks with some of the Love is Blind cast, and Chelsea stays home. Jimmy says that he invited Chelsea to the event, but Chelsea says he didn't, so it's another he said versus she said. But at this point in the show, I trust Jimmy a bit more than her, because there's just been multiple moments where Chelsea gets in her feelings so much that it like clouds the facts. Jimmy says he was not out for long. He only had one drink and came home. Chelsea claps back and says the girls from the pods texted her and now she's embarrassed. Again, this just shows how insecure Chelsea is. Why does a text message from some of the other women telling you that Jimmy is out, like, why does that make you feel embarrassed? And not only that, Jimmy invited you to the event. So why are you embarrassed? And what makes this worse is she's making her insecurities Jimmy's problem. And it's really not his problem. And then we finally get to the real issue, because Chelsea can never be straightforward. She says, well, I don't want you to go out and party. Cause like, I don't want to be with someone who wants to go out and party. And then she asks this question from Jimmy, but is that something I want to deal with? This part was so wild to me. Chelsea and Jimmy are in the real world now and they're trying to make their relationship work. So Chelsea, you need to look at Jimmy's behavior and look at your relationship and decide, is this something I can live with? If you think Jimmy goes out and parties too much, and if you think he goes out too much, then don't marry him. And this part was so weird because she specifically asked Jimmy, is that something I want to deal with? And I'm like, that's not a question for Jimmy. That's something you should be asking yourself. Next, Chelsea accuses him of lying in the pods and says that Jimmy said he was a homebody when they were in the pods. So again, this is a he said versus she said. Like, we don't know what was said in the pods. So that could be true. It may not be true. We don't know. But again, it's really tough for me to be on Chelsea's side at this point because multiple times we've seen her feelings cloud the facts. Next, Chelsea admits that she has a problem with Jimmy being friends with other women. And this was hypocritical because literally the previous day during the friend meetup, she said she had no issues with him being friends with women. And this is just a recurring thing with Chelsea. If she has an issue, she's not going to be upfront about it. Like, she's not going to tell Jimmy upfront. And like, that's a problem. If you have a problem with something, you need to be upfront about it. Next, this is just my opinion. So Jimmy works from home and I also work from home. So when you work from home all day, you are just ready to get out of the house to do something. And again, we're only seeing pieces of this entire puzzle, so it's not clear how often Jimmy goes out. But to me, it just seemed like Chelsea wants someone like Jimmy who works from home all day, and then once work is over, I guess she just wants him to stay at home every night too. Like, I understand wanting someone who's a homebody, homebody, but also if you're dating someone from work who works at home, you also understand that they do need to leave the house at some point. And then finally, we get the big finale of the argument. Chelsea admits that apparently Jimmy had slept with one of the friends during the friend meetup. It's not clear to us which one it is, but apparently Jimmy slept with one of them in the past, and Chelsea admits this on camera. Jimmy gets very upset. He did not want this information to come out because he was trying to be respectful of those women. And Chelsea admits that she's very uncomfortable with this, and most women would be. Just a few things I want to say about this. First, it's terrible that this information came out when Jimmy didn't want to, but I will say this was some of the best drama of the season. Next, if this information had not come out, Chelsea would have just straight up looked crazy. Like, at this point in the show, I thought Chelsea was just a lunatic, but now that this information has come out, her being this insecure makes a little more sense now. And I'm not excusing her insecurity. She definitely is hella insecure, but this gives a little bit of legitimacy to why she's so insecure. Next, if Jimmy is planning to marry Chelsea, he cannot be friends any longer with any of his exes or any women he has slept with previously. No woman is going to be okay with that. And especially Chelsea, she is the epitome of insecurity. So if you're planning to marry her, you just have to accept you are never gonna have a friend that's a woman ever again. And last thing I want to say about this, I saw a few comments on Reddit, and some people were saying that Jimmy should have lied to Chelsea and been like he never slept with her. So I do not agree with lying. I think honesty is the best policy. But I was wondering how that conversation off camera came up, because if Chelsea specifically asked Jimmy if he had slept with those other women, again, it shows her insecurity. Or did Jimmy just elect to tell her that information, like, oh, we used to date or something? After that, Chelsea and Jimmy get into another argument yet again, and it's very clear that they have just major lifestyle differences that make them not compatible with one another. But Chelsea still wants to make the relationship work, and she accuses him of throwing in the towel and not even trying. And the worst part about this argument is that Chelsea said she was not expecting this argument, which tells me she doesn't realize that her actions have consequences. It's almost like Chelsea thinks she can argue as much as she wants and they will always like get back together and try to make it work because, like I mentioned in my previous video, she has an idealistic view of marriage. After that, we move on to the pool party, and everyone from the pod squad joins, and Trevor and Chelsea finally meet, and Jessica and Jimmy finally meet. And during this pool party, not too much happens, but as a viewer, it very much seems like Chelsea should have chose Trevor and Jimmy should have chose Jessica. But like I said in my last video, if Jimmy chose Jessica, I ultimately don't think the relationship would have worked. And during this pool party, Chelsea and Jimmy get into another argument because Chelsea says out loud that she thinks Amy and Johnny are the strongest couple, and Jimmy gets really upset about this and takes it personally, but that's not a battle I would have chose. Like, I understand why he's upset, but me personally, I don't think that's a battle I would have chose. Y'all have way bigger issues you need to deal with. And to me, I realized Chelsea and Trevor would have been a better couple, and not just because Trevor is Chelsea's type. Their lifestyles would have made more sense, and this is just what I think. You can be head over heels in love with someone, you could find the one, but if your lifestyles don't match, they don't match. If Chelsea wanted somebody who was a homebody, she should have picked Trevor. Trevor is a bodybuilder. More than likely, Trevor's schedule is he goes to work, he goes to the gym, he eats multiple times a day, and he goes to sleep. And from his Instagram page, it looks like he's really serious about bodybuilding, so he definitely doesn't go out. So if Chelsea wanted someone who never goes out, she probably should have picked Trevor. But ultimately, she picked Jimmy because she had a feeling. Again, she has an idealistic view of marriage, and she wasn't really thinking, oh, whose lifestyle would match mine better. After that, Chelsea and Jimmy have their final date, and they ultimately decide not to go to the altar. And this part was one of the most annoying parts for me because Chelsea tells Jimmy, oh, we're throwing it in the towel just over one thing. And it's not just one argument. They have like 6 or 7 fundamental issues that they need to work on. And she's just saying it's one thing. At this point, it is just very clear Chelsea is more concerned about a wedding than she is with having a successful relationship. And Jimmy was right for ending the relationship. After that, we move on to the reunion, and the reunions for this show are always pretty terrible. Like, don't get me wrong, this one was the best, but the past 5 reunions have been horrible. So literally the bar was in hell. And during the reunion, Nick and Vanessa don't even ask Jimmy and Chelsea if they're still together. Like, after I watched the reunion, I had to Google whether or not Jimmy and Chelsea were still together because I didn't know. And there's just 2 things I want to mention from the reunion. First, Chelsea says that Jimmy's conversation with Jessica during the pool party was disrespectful. I thought this was kind of dumb because Chelsea's conversation with Trevor honestly wasn't much better. Like, yes, Chelsea did a little bit better by not unpacking her issues she was having with Jimmy, but Jimmy and Trevor's conversation could be considered a little disrespectful as well. Oh, and sorry, I didn't talk about Jimmy and Jessica's conversation at the pool party, but basically Jimmy and Jessica have a cordial conversation, and it almost seemed like Jessica left the door open for a relationship with Jimmy, which I was surprised about. I thought Jessica would be completely done with him. And Jessica was still struggling with the breakup as much as he was. And second thing, Chelsea admits to forgetting the cameras were even there when she was filming, and we absolutely love to see that. That's how reality TV should be. You're supposed to act like the cameras aren't there. Let me tell y'all, Chelsea forgetting the cameras are around is what gave us an amazing season. And this is how reality TV is supposed to be. You're supposed to act like the cameras aren't there. But as this show progresses, as we get more seasons, a lot of the contestants are like hyper aware of the cameras, and they purposely try to say and do things off camera. Like Jimmy, when he admitted that he had slept with one of his friends, he admitted that to Chelsea off camera, and us as an audience know, give us the juicy details on camera. Same with Ken and Brittany. Apparently they broke up off camera the first time and we didn't even get to see it, and it's like, stop doing stuff off camera. If y'all didn't want to be on reality television, then don't be on it. And that's all I got for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and pound that like button, pound that subscribe button, and ring that notification bell, and I will see you all next time. Have a good one. Bye.
It's time to quit while we're